Welcome back, everybody, into Bills Chat. I am Josh McCarty. With me, as always, is Luka. Luka, we finally have a Bills schedule to look at. For some reason, it feels like the schedule looks a lot harder once you put the games in order. How are you doing?
The caveat of they look harder in order. I've been seeing a lot of that discourse, and obviously we'll get into it a little bit more during this episode. I'm doing all right, but I also feel like when it first released, I didn't have that early stretch looks tough or any of that kind of reaction to it. It just looks like a schedule to me. There's the noteworthy primetime situation that we'll obviously dive into 2 feet and all of that stuff. But no, I mean, I've been better when it comes to the overall sports fandom of my life at this current time, recording on Friday afternoon. But big picture, all things considered, it's hard to complain when you're living and healthy, and we get some fun stuff when it comes to looking forward to what will be the inaugural season at the new Highmark Stadium and what that schedule looks like.
What Luka's referring to about Friday afternoon is this episode is releasing on Monday. Obviously, hopefully, that means it's the day of a Sabres Game 7 against the Montreal Canadiens. But sitting here on Friday recording, we're on the heels of a very disappointing Game 5 where the Sabres lose 6-3. So hopefully they win on Saturday and everything turns around for them. And we're looking at a very fun Game 7 in Buffalo. But we do not know what happened on Saturday at time of recording. So there's not a whole lot of Sabres conversation that'll make a lot of sense listening on Monday. So go Sabres. Hopefully you're still alive at the time this episode drops. But we do know what the Bills schedule looks like. And let's start off with what you said about the first 5 games, because we can talk about the amount of primetime games they have. We can talk about the fact how they're on Christmas and Thanksgiving. But I think a lot of people are focused on those first 5 games and really starting the season off in what has been a house of horrors for the Bills, Houston. I'm not intimidated by that. I know the Bills have lost some really weird games in Houston, even a playoff game that was really weird, but I'm never going to go into a Bills Texans game thinking the Bills can't beat the Houston Texans. I've seen too much of CJ Stroud. Our quarterback is Josh Allen. It's week 1. Will I pick the Bills to win? Ask me 2 days before the game starts, not on May 15th. But that didn't come out and make me think, oh my God, we're screwed. In fact, if you care about such things, the Bills are favored in that game, according to Vegas. What were your thoughts on the opener?
I hear anyone that has the Josh Allen struggles in that stadium, history's never been great, the long list of things. I hear all of it. In my humble opinion, if you have a snake bitten opponent, whatever it is, that you feel like you just can't get over that hump, feels like week 1, especially just tucked in that Sunday 1 p.m. spot, might be your best case scenario in playing said opponent in that stadium, because you have the least amount of time to get yourself ready when it comes to that game. And all things considered, you have the least amount of tape, to kind of base off of and prepare for, talking about D'Amico Ryan and the Texans. And it's kind of that clean slate. Both teams are just going to go in there, and you see a lot of fluky things happen. You see a lot of strange things happen week 1, more so than say a week 4, a week 5 game. Like that week 1 slate, there's going to be a couple games that surprise people, but then it also feels like the best opportunity to kind of, 1, you're at your greatest health, hopefully, and 2, you just kind of are getting a clean shot at the opposition before they have any sort of trend, understanding, or whatever you do best on the season, because the season is yet to start until that game. So just from my take of it, I love the fact that with playing on the road against the Texans, where it could have been slated throughout all the different weeks, week 1 feels like kind of that sneaky, nice spot to get that one out of the way, because God forbid they go in and, it feels like Allen just can't figure it out once again, and that D-line's getting at him, whatever. It's week 1. You can easily shrug that off and just move on with your life and get to the next game, which will be easily, I love 2 things about that as well that will go into it. 1, short week, you go right into it. And 2, it's the launch of your new stadium. It'll be easier to turn that page and just move on and get to that exciting game that is your first regular season game in your new stadium against a quality opponent in the Lions, although it feels like the shine's kind of faded a little bit with Detroit of late. But that whole scenario between the opponent in week one, but then also the ability to feed right into week two, I like where that's slotted. I don't fear that one bit, and I think optimally it is in a good spot for the Bills if you even have that negative outlook of playing at Houston, if you're one of those individuals.
I think we'll also learn a lot about Jim Leonhard in this first 2-game stretch, because Houston is not an intimidating team. Houston is a team that your defense should be an advantage against. And really, if your offense can just stay above water, as a team you should probably beat. And then you move right into 4 days later, the home opener at the new Highmark. And it's kind of like the direct opposite. You have the high flying Lions coming in. Their defense is okay, not great. Their offense might be as good as any team in the sport when they're hitting on all cylinders. And obviously by week 2, you wouldn't expect them to be dealing with the injuries they've dealt with the last few years. So it'll be interesting just to see, one, how new head coach Joe Brady navigates right off the bat an interesting schedule. Some things that I think maybe we took for granted when we wanted Sean McDermott gone is just the amount of experience he has at weird things like that. And then two, how the new defensive coordinator will do. I was not thrilled when I saw that the first game against New Highmark would be on Thursday. I'm not a big Thursday night football fan. I'm also quite surprised that a Bills-Lions game is on Thursday night football. It seems like it's hidden instead of just, highlighted. What were your thoughts on the Bills opener being on Thursday?
I'm not a Thursday night football guy myself. That is well documented. I just think it dilutes and kind of it hinders the ability to get the best out of teams week in, week out. Understand the money, understand the broadcasting, all that stuff that goes into it. You got to do what you got to do. If you're the NFL, that is. But when it comes to just quality of product and players and all that kind of stuff, I've just, in a general sense, Thursday night football, I am not a fan of, and I think it hurts things more than it helps from that standpoint. I think having that also be the, home opener, the inaugural opener of the stadium for a regular season game, so on and so forth, I think it's just also kind of a little bit of it's a bummer. I don't think it's the worst thing. It's a standalone game, which is great. I know a lot of individuals out there I saw was thinking it would be a Sunday night game. It was thinking it would be on NBC, and that's where they'd want it. NBC does like to have the Bills on them for one, and they do seem to like to be at that stadium as well, or in Buffalo. This year they are not, but feels like of recent there's been a Sunday night game in Buffalo. They just choose to be here. Didn't work out that way. I agree with Thursday night of all the standalones, though, is the least exciting. It's the one I personally don't call that tucked away just because of the day. Like your McAfee shows, any of your talk shows, that's going to be the one game they talk about, at least on that day, because there's nothing else to then talk about otherwise in the NFL. But again, I do know where your head is at in that sense of it's going to kick off the week, but then, or I should say weekend, but then from there, it kind of just dissipates. And when you have something like Lions at Bills, that feels like it would be better as a bookended highlight of the weekend rather than being the thing that kicks it off, especially early on in the season when you're trying to highlight a new stadium, a new product of the NFL, all of these things that it's going to. That one is definitely one where it feels as if one, Fitzmagic might have some serious pull when it comes to what Amazon wants to do. And from there, it does feel like Amazon broadcasts have, at the help of Fitzmagic, but in general, when they've had the Bills on their program, they definitely, it's one of the few times that it feels like a Buffalo sports team is getting favorited, and that's the only way I'll put it. So that's what it smells like to me when it comes to that being that game and that moment at that time. Feels like someone like himself kind of spoke him as like, we should really try to get this thing.
It's funny you mentioned McAfee. My first thought when I saw that schedule come out, knowing how close McAfee and Brandon Beane are, knowing how McAfee was one of the guys at the forefront begging for the big Buffalo statues, yeah. Knowing it's a Thursday night game and it's the opener, I do wonder if there's a shot that McAfee broadcasts live from Buffalo that day. A lot of it will depend on where college football game day is that weekend, I'm sure, because he likes to be on site on Friday. So if there's an East Coast city they could be at that it lines up, like say like a Penn State.
I was going to say, I'm almost positive It's unconfirmed, but that week, that is week 3 of college football, and that is Ole Miss at LSU or it's LSU at Ole Miss, which if
Mhm.
anyone knows college football, that is the Lane Kiffin game now. That is
Mhm.
going to be the most anticipated game. So unless one other game, that there are a couple other noteworthy ones of that weekend, unless one of
Mhm.
those becomes much more elevated, very, 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 very high chance college game day will be in Mississippi at Ole Miss.
Some
So,
interesting signs in the crowd that'll be there probably
oh,
based on some recent comments. Holy cow. Anyway, so you and I have watched the Bills for a long time. We've talked about this before. I go back to prior to the drought, and I lived the entire drought. And there were so many years where we didn't have a primetime game at all,
mhm.
or you'd get like a token Thursday night game. And at the beginning of the drought, it was like, okay, we'll give you a game in Kansas City where the Bills score 5 points, and we'll give you a game in New England where they're interviewing Robert Kraft right as Kelly Holcomb gets sacked and fumbles the ball and makes the game turning play. And then there was, I believe, an opener, and I'm just doing this off of memory, a Sunday night football opener against the Titans in 2000. That was like the revenge game from the Music City Miracle. And I want to say that was the last Bills home primetime game home until 2027 when the Cowboys came to town. I could be wrong on that. There might have been another home one along the way.
2007, not 2027.
Oh yeah, 2007. The Cowboys came to town. And what
Yeah.
was interesting about that was it was such a big deal that the Bills had Monday Night Football in town, because at that point you just felt like a dead zone. You'd gone through the
Yeah.
Marv Levy being general manager. You'd gone through, Mike Mularkey quitting, Bledsoe being an epic failure, Lossman being a bust. I mean, players were just leaving. Molds wanted out. Reuben Brown wanted out. Antoine Winfield wanted out. And it just felt like you were in NFL Siberia. But for one night, the world had to pay attention to us, and it was such a big deal. And I was so nervous for that game, even though the Bills were like a bad team. It didn't mean anything. And in theory, you should have been rooting for them to lose. And then ultimately, they went on to like lose that game in epically heartbreaking fashion. That's like one of the staple games of the drought. And that is all to say just how much different our life is now, where before the schedule would come out in a 16-game season back then, it would be 14 or 15 games would be Sunday at 1:00.
Yeah.
This season, the Bills start off with 3 of their first 4 games at Sunday at 1:00. And that's kind of cool. That's my preferred time slot. It makes everything on Sunday make sense, how I want to start my day, how I want my day to go. And then after that, you get 4 more Sunday at 1:00 games the rest of the way. And that is the ultimate compliment to the Bills. That is the networks demanding the Bills. And we get it. It's the guy behind me. It's Josh Allen. It's not the Bills logo. I mean, there's something romantically sports about the Bills crowd being a wild crowd. And if you can get a snow game, I mean, that adds to it. But it's the guy behind me that's going to be in the Hall of Fame. That's one of the best watches in football. Very similar to Lamar Jackson. And unlike Lamar, you don't have to really worry about him getting hurt. He hasn't had that issue. So you feel good about having him in that spot and not having to worry about, Mitch Trubisky or Kyle Allen starting that game, whoever your backup is that year. I do miss the Sunday 1:00 games, Luka, though. And
Yeah.
it's kind of like must be nice to have to miss the Sunday at 1:00 games, but first world problems. But I wish we had more, and we don't. In a perfect world, how many Sunday 1:00 games would you have on your schedule?
As many before Thanksgiving at home. And what I'm getting at with this is it's obviously a pretty specific window I'm providing, but when I think about my childhood, when I think about, all the years being in the position that I am, being able to go to games as many as I have, my favorite games, the ones I used to tell my parents back when they had seasons, like those were the cool ones to go to, and or like just understanding the weather, the time of year, stuff like that. Even when the Bills were complete dog crap, like there was still a promise of maybe something, being that like late September, early October is the optimal time. And it's, if you can have a sunny late September home game at 1:00, that is to me some of the best Bills football to attend. That is it doesn't matter even on result at that point in time. It is just the perfect time to go. And why I even bring that up is my favorite thing about this schedule was seeing weeks 3 and 4, both the Chargers and Patriots games at home being Sunday, 1:00, boom. Like that is premium time to play football. And I always felt like even during all these years, for the most part, it didn't happen last year, I don't think. But maybe there was one. It always felt like at least one in that window would be provided, and you get that home game 1:00, early October, late September, whatever it is. That's the best. But I'm with you as an overall picture as well, that when you are in the 1:00 slate, because you wake up on Sunday, you're getting ready. In my case, I get the house kind of cleaned up, straightened up a little bit, because I, of course, host football Sundays with a lot of my friends and stuff. When you have that Bills game at 1:00, though, the friends don't, trickle in late and things of that nature. Stuff's not coming up. Everyone gets their food situation in order by 1:00, which is always just another thing off the plate, off the mind. And everyone's sitting, and we're all able to enjoy a Bills game at 1:00. And then like it just allows that 1:00 window, even though, I have numerous screens with a bunch of different games going on and all that. Of course, the central display is showing the Bills game, and that's where everyone's attention is clearly at. And from there, you get to then relax into the 4:00 window. Everyone goes their ways. You can relax even further into the Sunday night window. We get to sit down and record our podcast. It's kind of like having that Bills game at 1:00 is premium in the sense of how it lines up the day, both beforehand and afterwards. And then on top of it, you don't feel like you need to then do something different on the weekend as a whole to then navigate that Bills game. It's like it naturally finds itself exactly where it needs to be, rather than it's like, oh, we're Monday night this week. So that kind of kills my entire ability to do anything on a Monday and or Thursday night. In that instance, it's like Thursday's completely chalked off and gone. And that can really set up some bad Fridays as well, depending on the result of Thursday night. It's just one of those things where Sunday 1:00, it can just be part of the football fan experience. And it fits so well where that no matter how you handle your football weekends, that to me is the most premium slot to have maximum enjoyment without kind of needing to restructure your life around it as well.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And, the 1:00 game, depending on what time zone you're in, it just sets up nicely if you're trying to spend the day with your family too. Football Sunday in my house, and like many of you, it's an event. It's not just let's watch the Bills game casually. We go to the park in the morning, we throw the ball around, we try to get energy out, we figuring out what we're going to do. Are we going to grill? Are we going to order out? We're going to invite people over. And then when the game ends at 4, it's 3:00 my time. And then you just kind of have a couple hours to breathe. And then you get into dinner, and everything's normal. But every other time slot kind of occupies dinner. But speaking of family, Luka, I know one year for Christmas, I asked for Josh Allen. This wasn't what I had in mind. The Bills, for the first time I can remember a team ever doing this, and I believe it's the Bills and Rams this year. They play, is it the Bills and Rams? Who is it also? It's the Bills. One other team's done this, I think. But they play on Christmas and on Thanksgiving. And that is bonkers. And look, I'm glad the Bills are a primetime fishbowl team that everybody wants to watch. And it's great to be in this position. And it'll be even better if the Bills finally get a Super Bowl and aren't just the team that has the elite quarterback that can't get over the hump. But man, when you talk about structuring a day and structuring a holiday, we all know how important the Bills are to our lives. I assume if you're listening to a Bills podcast in May, it's because you're a diehard fan like we are, and missing a Bills game is just not really an option. So then you talk about a game kicking off at 4:30 in the afternoon on Christmas. Holy cow. A lot of people's Christmases are you're at your grandma's house, and you're exchanging gifts with your in-laws, or you're having like a get together with your friends, or the kids have settled down from the morning and now they just want to play with their toys. And you're like, oh, everybody quiet, the Bills game is on. It's just, it's in the way. I love the Thanksgiving night game, Luke. I think it's the perfect slot where you've had a long day of eating and, watching the Cowboys and Lions do their thing. Usually those games are kind of snoozers. Not this year. Those games are excellent this year, the whole slate. But now it's like, I don't know. I don't mind the Thanksgiving night game, but Christmas just felt like, man, that's a little too much.
Yeah. So first, it's Chiefs last year. along with the Cowboys and Lions for that instance, actually did this Thanksgiving and Christmas thing. Chiefs being the one that's kind of an outlier because, of course, the Cowboys Lions play on Thanksgiving every year, so they have kind of the most opportunities to take a shot at that egg. But then this season, the Bills aren't even alone. And I think the Chiefs as well, technically. No, okay. Chiefs are not playing on Thanksgiving this year, obviously. So, okay. So it's the Bears and the Bills this year that will be doing that. Okay. The Bears are doing it this year as well, where they will play the Lions and then the Packers. So, my take on this is I'm frustrated by the Christmas game in this instance. I feel for the players and coaches mainly. I think that's from a human level, just to get this out of the way. It's one of those things where I can imagine players, as fun as it is as a player to play in these highlighted games on holidays, the human side of it is it's extremely frustrating that two major holidays, family oriented holidays, are now taken away from you because you need to be playing an NFL game. So then your families need to adjust around that if they want to, of course, have you partake in events and whatever that are taking place around Thanksgiving and Christmas. So that's kind of a bummer. But then on top of it too, it's just from a fan perspective and stuff. It's a little like Thanksgiving games to me are easier to palate and just kind of like more enjoyable. It's part of the event. It's part of the day occasion. A Christmas Day one, especially in the afternoon time, nighttime, I think you could sell me on. But in the afternoon and stuff, like you said, there's just so much going on a lot of times for a lot of individuals to then now have to add that on top of it, where it's like, hey, love my parents, love my in-laws, love all my family members, everything. We're going to have to block off this 3.5 hours now. Like I can't be doing anything. Like you can grab me during commercial breaks if you're paying attention, or halftime, but like, I'm sorry, not sorry, but also sorry. Like, we got to do this now. And then on top of it, it's the 4:30 game, I want to say. So then it's like you're in dinner territory, and it just, there's a lot to not like. And I feel like the NFL, understandably, they want to put marquee teams in these marquee slots and so on and so forth. But it almost feels like it needs to have this kind of caveat to it, where you now see the trend as talked about with the teams last year that did it, the teams this year that are now going to be doing it. You one or right, like one that allows whatever teams that are playing on one of said holidays, being Thanksgiving or Christmas, and we can maybe excuse the Lions and Cowboys from that just because they have the exclusive rights to their slots on Thanksgiving. But even then, there should be like a year's gap where they don't do it again. But you one or the other. It's Thanksgiving or Christmas, not both. That helps, allow the teams to enjoy one of their holidays as individuals and fans of those teams as people to enjoy it. But then on top of it, it allows other teams to maybe have that opportunity, as that can be a slot to put a team there. And you're not going to then, as the Bills in this case, and then the Chiefs last year, you kind of double down on these teams that you're just force feeding the general NFL fan on top of their fan bases. And it's like, hey, it's not exploitation, but at the same time, it's like, we are going to showcase them as much as possible in these windows. And I'm not a huge fan of it. Overall, I think there should be some regulation to it. And look, do I want to sit there then and then the consequences watch Raiders Jets on Christmas? No, I would probably just straight up not watch that altogether. But you get more creative with it, have more teams. It's not like the Bills and the Chiefs and the Broncos are the only teams that exist on this earth that people want to watch. Like, there are other teams. I mean, talked about the Cowboys. Of course, everyone wants to watch them, but the Bears, say what you want about the Giants and their product. They're on the up at this moment in time with the new head coach, and they are obviously a massive market team. There's other ways to go about this, in my opinion, that you don't need to be doubling down on any team ever when it comes to two holidays, in a season that they are appearing on both within that same season. I just think it's a little bit much for my taste of things.
And then you look at week 6 or week 15 where this game is, that's also a fantasy football game, because you talk about that's like the semifinals of fantasy football championships. So people that wouldn't otherwise be like, well, it's Christmas, I'm taking the day off from the NFL, are like, wait, I got Josh Allen, I got James Cook, I got DJ Moore, I got Bo Nix, in my team, in my league. I'm gonna go ahead and watch this game. So, it adds a lot to it. I also was surprised that I'm not surprised the Bills got a Thanksgiving game. I was surprised that they put that Bills Chiefs game though, because I know the Chiefs are coming off of a down year, but there's so much about Bills Chiefs that feels like modern day Patriots Colts, where it was Manning Brady, it's Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes. It feels like two best quarterbacks in the sport, two of the most consistent teams in the sport. Every time they play, it feels like it's a one-score game that comes down to the wire. They've had classic playoff matchups. Just a little surprised they would put it on the Thanksgiving window. But at the end of the day, I do think that the NFL is quite obviously trying to make a shift toward more games on streaming devices. And to do that, you don't want to be showcasing, the Titans playing, the Titans playing the Vikings on, Thanksgiving night. You want to see two good teams going at it. Let's talk about rest, because when you look at schedules, one of the first things I look at is the bye week. And ideally, you want it in the middle of the season or maybe even skewing late. That does not happen this year for the Bills. They have a week 7 bye. That's not terrible. It's middle-ish, but it's really like the first third of the season, and then they have a bye. But what they also have is they have a couple mini buys baked in there, where after those Thursday night games, you do get like a mini buy. And with them having 2 Thursday night games against the Lions with the opener and against the Chiefs we just talked about on Thanksgiving, they now get a mini buy in week 12, which should catapult them to, lick their wounds a little bit as they head into the home stretch of the season. But you brought up a good point while we were off the air about the rest advantage the Bills has as relative to the rest of the league. And while a lot of fans are doom and gloom looking at this, like, how could you start us off with the Texans and then we have a short turnaround with the Lions? When you actually crunch the numbers, you realize the NFL did the Bills quite the favor.
Yeah, the big picture takeaway I had from the schedule once it was released and you started seeing the other kind of statistics come out of it all was, opponents aside, where they were placed is not aside in this case, in this scenario, but considering where other opponents are playing and how their schedules broke down, the Bills might have gotten one of the, if not the most favorable schedules around the entire league. And the two things that go into that are, one, the net rest day differential compared to the opposition. They are a plus 14. Only the Bears are greater than that at a plus 15. I do think the ultimate key to that, ironically enough, is Bills Bears, for instance, is on that Saturday before both teams respectfully will be playing on Christmas Day. And for that, I think that creates that little bit of caveat in there, because after those two teams, it's Dallas at plus 11.5 and then Washington at 10. And next thing you know, you're at New England, which is a plus 8.5 along with Carolina. So just a big dip from there. I think that one little section of the schedule may have helped those numbers a little bit. But overall, you are having a net differential of rest greater than pretty much the entire league. And then the other part of it too is, half the league essentially is not playing a team that will come off a bye. The Bills are one of those teams. At no point will you ever be facing an opposition that is coming off a bye week overall. And that's big, of course, right? An extra week of prep for someone to get prepared for you is a natural disadvantage, whether you want to believe it or not. So I think, just opponents aside and things of that nature, it's like you look at how they broke it down day to day, week to week, and the NFL kind of gave the Bills a true favorable schedule in that sense of being able to prepare for teams week in, week out, and not be at any sort of disadvantage due to rest and or, teams having additional rest over them going into their matchups. So I like everything about that. Of course, like it's all about week to week and staying healthy and the rest you can achieve and preparation you can have. I mean, having bye week 7 leading into a home game against the Ravens, just on a 1:00 spot as well to start off November. That's great in my opinion. Like there's so much about that rest dynamic of the schedule that I think is very favorable for the Bills. And like on top of it all, you want to talk about rest, you get a home game. We talked about Chiefs on Thanksgiving night and stuff like that. The first NBC Bills Chiefs game since 21, I believe it was, where we ended up winning in Arrowhead. You get the Dolphins at home right before that. And I'm just going to say it for what it is. That's a favorable matchup when it comes to being able to lead into a home Thanksgiving night game that you don't ever want to not show up and play, but it feels like an A+ effort is not necessarily going to be needed for that game before you go into your Chiefs game, which is definitely a positive overall. So even a lot of your tougher ones there, you have a little bit of a built-in positive, a built-in favorable thing happening for you along this entirety of the schedule that I love everything about that and the structure of it.
It's a huge advantage for the Bills they need to take advantage of. And I will also say this, if you're somebody that has season tickets and had to pay the PSL prices, you get a good list of home games for season one. And, just think of it as NFL is a quarterback league and the Bills play in the AFC East. So there's nothing you can do about the Jets and Dolphins. They're going to be on your home schedule regardless. Mm-hmm. But the other quarterbacks besides the Jets and Dolphins that come to Highmark are Jared Goff, Justin Herbert, Drake May, Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes, Caleb Williams. It's pretty good. Pretty good.
Pretty damn good.
I mean, you want to talk about the who's who of who might be in the MVP conversation. You might have 4 of those guys like in the top 5 or 6 of that list, and they're going against Josh Allen. So from that standpoint, that's a really damn good schedule. Now, outside of that, there's not too much to look at when it comes to the schedule. I will say this. It's very easy to look at strength of schedule and think, oh, this team's they're going to be so tough based on last year. I didn't tell you we were going to do this, but I'm curious what you think. If you had to pick one game that based on strength of schedule looks tough now that you think will be quite a bit easier by the time it rolls around, and then vice versa, maybe a game that we're sleeping on that by the time the game comes around, we're like, maybe that was tougher than we thought. What would you pick? And since I didn't give you time to think about this, I'll give you my 2. When I look at this, I'm looking at a couple of teams here, and I'm just going to be honest. I don't think that what the Patriots did last year is sustainable. I don't think that they're a team that is good enough to be representing the AFC. I think they were a team that was fortunate enough to take advantage of a playoff slate that if the Bills don't win a Super Bowl in the Josh Allen era, they will regret not taking advantage of last year. But up and down, I think the Patriots are a fairly mediocre roster, and that includes the projected trade for A.J. Brown that I'm expecting them to make, that everybody's expecting them to make. So when I look at that, I think that the Bills can very much go 6-0 in their division. They may let one slip, but I'm not looking at those Patriot games as somehow like daunting tasks. And then on the other side of things, much like last year, where if you had the Bears on your schedule, you're like, oh, that's going to be easy. And then all of a sudden the Bears are one of the best teams in the sport. I'll probably go that way on the Vikings. I just, I'm too much of a believer in Kevin O'Connell. I think really what hurt the Vikings last year was just how terrible JJ McCarthy is. I'm not sure that Kyler Murray and Kevin O'Connell are the perfect blend of scheme and player. But I know Kyler Murray can play in this league, and I know that he can execute some offense. And with the weapons they have with Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison, and then they also got Jawan Jennings now, and Hawkinson comes back, and I'm a big believer in their defense. I think that the Vikings are going to be a tough out in their building. And I don't know if anybody was looking at that game as a layup, but I think that one could end up being maybe like the Falcons game last year where you go into it and you're like, I had no idea this team was this good. So those would be my 2.
I was going to say the Vikings one was definitely glaring at me as one that it's like, it doesn't seem too difficult on paper right now, but I'm a KOC fan just like you and Kyler for all the jokes and kind of, I'm honestly with my little bit of Cardinals fandom in me that as well, happy to see him out of the desert. But it's one of those things where I can see that marriage working easily. And, I'm also not a believer in JJ McCarthy at all at this point. And I think, that's one where as long as it clicks between Kyler and KOC and that motivation's there, especially being on just a 1-year kind of prove it style deal for Kyler, the tools around him will be available. And, if he makes it work, easily that game on Monday night, right in the middle of the schedule, could be something more elevated. That one definitely stands out to me. Just to give another one, honestly, I just think the Packers week 14 on Sunday night, like, one, you're playing at Lambeau, but at the same time, it feels as if the Packers are they're kind of right now, I think, by the general public and stuff, looked at as kind of a wishy-washy. You either stand with them, against them, but not polarizing in any way. I think, though, the Packers are definitely the style team that I could easily understand and believe in, that will turn things around. Christian Watson, if he stays healthy for a full stretch of season into that game, stuff like that, they can absolutely be dynamic on offense while still having a very solid defense, in my opinion, as long as they also just stop inside zone calling like 30 times a game. That's one that I think could definitely elevate itself. The game, though, for me, that is like on paper, people were probably looking at it as a big timer and stuff like that. And I'm just going to be quite frank, I don't see it. It's Christmas Day, the Broncos. I just, I agree with everything you said about the Patriots. The Broncos, to me, I think, because they almost got the ultimate excuse, in the sense of last time we saw them, unfortunately, Bo Nix couldn't play, and you saw what happened, and the Patriots kind of got that little bit of a layup where they didn't need to even show up and dominate. They just needed to wait for the mistake from the Broncos. And that's exactly what happened. And then weather also gave them a little bit of an assist. That I look at that Christmas Day game and I get it. And, memory of the Bills Broncos last as well. It's like we couldn't make a stop, things of that nature. To me, the Broncos, is that defense going to be able to be that good once again? Just because I don't see the superstars really outside of a Surtain that can kind of continue that dominance that they had. They have, of course, the edges we talked about, that we would like to even see that style be on the Bills now that they have Leonard and stuff. But you also have a lot of guys in house that have good knowledge of how things go on the other side of the ball. But then the Broncos offense is one that I will die on a hill of. I just don't believe in. I don't believe in Bo Nix. There's so many things that I don't know if the Broncos will be able to keep the high end play and momentum that they had last season going into this season and all the way down to week 16, where I could see, in my head, I can envision one where that game's important for the Bills, but it's even more important for the Broncos in the sense of they lose that game, they're eliminated from postseason possibility. I can see that scenario playing out in my head easily. Whereas I think right now on paper, I think the reason it's on Christmas and all of that stuff is, of course, because of the divisional game that took place. But then it's believed that both teams should be in it, near the end of all things being said as well. And I would say there are doubts for me when it comes to the Denver Broncos that I kind of flip the other way on it. And I could see it more being a desperate Broncos team to keep any remaining hope of their season alive. And the Bills still being the team that I believe overall at this moment in time, as long as 17's healthy, will continue to win 10, 11 plus games every season in and out.
So by my count, there are 6 stadiums that Josh Allen hasn't won in as a visiting player. And that would be, so I guess the 7th would be San Francisco, because he beat the Niners on the road, but that game was in Arizona during the COVID year, but I'm not counting that one. And he gets a chance to exercise 2 of those this year. One is Houston, and then one is Green Bay. He's only started 1 game in Green Bay. It was his rookie season. It was his 3rd ever NFL career start. And it came right after that famous Vikings game where he went on the road, jumped over Anthony Barr, looked like the second coming, right? That picture behind Luka. And then they went on the road and got shut out in Green Bay. So it'd be cool to see Josh Allen get this victory. But Luka, that's a look at the schedule. Otherwise, it's just, how healthy can the team stay, all that stuff. But it's always kind of neat to see the schedule. One other small piece of Bills news we want to hit on before we get out of here, though, is there was some news this week that the Bills are moving their game day radio broadcast off of WGR.
Yep.
And they are keeping Chris Brown and Eric Wood. I think Eric Wood and Chris Brown are excellent, by the way. I think they're both fantastic. But one news that I think caught people a little bit sideways is Steve Tasker is replacing Sal Capaccio as the sideline reporter. And that brought up a lot of, is this the Bills' way of sticking it to WGR because of the Brandon Bean receiver comments? And, we can talk about Sal Capaccio, what we think about him and all that stuff. But I just want to say off the get-go, no, this is the trend in sports now is teams want to own the rights to their own broadcast, and they want to make money off of their own broadcasts. So Steve Tasker works for the Bills. Sal Capaccio works for WGR. So it's just one less salary they have to pay. It's, it's just business. I don't think it's personal. But any thoughts on Sal Capaccio? Also the NFL radio audience is not like a baseball radio audience where people really take in the games on radio. I think it's kind of a niche audience. Most people either go to the games or watch the games, not a huge listening audience. Maybe it's turn down the game and listen to them if that's your thing. So I don't know many people this is actually going to impact, but any thoughts on that move, getting Sal Capaccio off that spot?
Unless Sal himself comes out and says otherwise, I can't see this being a, dig at him or WGR by doing it through him, whatever. I think this is just business. This is just, it is what it is. I also think there's dollars and cents that go into this. I don't know who pays who and who owns the contract rights to whoever, but it from an outsider feels like maybe it's a simple way to cut some pennies because of where Tasker's obligations currently reside. So I think that is what it is. Yeah, it's funny that it's definitely news and noteworthy and things like that. And I think it's an interesting shift and change. I remember going to games when I had the opportunity with my parents that they chose to listen to pregames through 97 Rock. That was just their own preference. But like you still had that pregame, you had the WGR pregame. I know of a lot of my friends that still listen to that to this day. It's just part of their Sunday morning ritual. They would talk about, I found it funny, and I've stopped asking this, but early on in Football Sunday lore, they would always be like, Luka, did you listen to WGR? I'm like, no, I've been cleaning my house, getting ready for Football Sunday. What? And it's like, you guys are the ones in the cars listening to WGR on the ride over. Of course you are listening, but I'd get the little caveats and stuff like that and hear the things that were taking place at that time. I think it is interesting. I'll be curious to see how it affects, because I imagine, and where my point is, I imagine WGR will still do extensive coverage of their own of the Bills. They just don't have the exclusive rights to certain dynamics and aspects of it. That's where this resides. So I imagine Sal Capaccio will even have some change or some say in things and just continue to do his thing. I'm reading something right now that was tweeted from him where it's 1:49. This was tweeted out at 12:34 today. Like he's remaining with WGR. He'll be covering the Bills, things like that. And he kind of just gave a hat tip to everything that had come before this. He'll be at every game, home and away, and can't wait to see and talk to everyone. Continues. So I think this is just more of a, there's going to be maybe 1, 2, 3 things that will be a little bit different in the sense of how Sal or WGR in general are able to cover the Bills and kind of the access they'll have. But overall, if you are a WGR, truther and lifer, and that's where you like to get your content from, I imagine, in my opinion, you won't see too much change. I think there'll just be kind of a little bit of shift in understanding where they're getting their information from, how much access they're truly being provided, and kind of take it from there. So I don't think there's anything, I'll say sinister, but I know that's not even where you were getting at when it comes to, the dig at WGR, but I don't think there's anything more in that. I think it's just a simple shift, business decision style thing. And then from there, I will be intrigued to see what that transpires with 97 Rock. I'll probably, for the first time in a long time, turn it on pregame just out of curiosity, just because my childhood ways will be curious on if there's anything different about it. But I also would fully expect not too much will be different. And we don't live in a day and age anymore, Josh, where people are bringing the old headsets to tune into the radio while they're sitting at games anymore. So the amount of intake of radio play-by-play, unfortunately, for, as you said, Curtis Brown and Eric Wood do a phenomenal job, but it's not taken in nearly as much as the Van Miller days and things like that, where even people at games would prefer to listen to them while sitting there because it was just that much part of their lives from the week-to-week viewing experience. And
I also think that this will probably spell an end to Shope and Bulldog doing the network post-game show, which I don't think is a bad thing. I just don't. I'm going to be honest. Like, I like Shope and Bulldog. to some extent, but I don't love their. I mean, Mike Schopp rubs people the wrong way, and I'd say in the post game slot, he definitely, some of his ways of rubbing people the wrong way come out perfectly clear, and they're obnoxious. And he made a comment this week about a Sabres game that I still can't get over. And I'm not even like Mr. Saber, but to admit that he didn't even watch the first 2 periods of a Saber playoff game because he was busy recording a fantasy podcast.
Yep.
I don't get it. Whatever. All right. Well, anyway, speaking of the Sabres, hopefully if you're listening to this on Monday, you're nervous and anxiously awaiting game 7. That means the Sabres took care of business on Saturday. If not, as the Sabres fans, we're
R.I.P.
licking our wounds and looking ahead to next year and, Connor McDavid trade and all that fun stuff that we can talk about. But anyway, it's been a fun ride. The Sabres have given us bonus content on this show that otherwise wouldn't have been there. It's been a fun ride. Hopefully it's still going on at the time you're listening to this. But for Luka, I am Josh McCarty. The summer months are upon us. Summer content will be here before you know it, and training camp will be here before you know it. And we will see you next time on Bills Chat.